Welcome back to Digging Deep, the podcast where we offer bereavement bites for time-pressed professionals and where we explore the trends, challenges, and stories that are shaping the future of the death care profession in Canada. I'm your host, Heather Kiteley, President and CEO of GFD and second-generation funeral director. Joined by a guest who brings a wealth of experience and so many heartfelt stories from the world of military repatriation, military farewells, and just such a rich history in this beautiful profession of ours. Thank you. Together we're going to explore how our guest entered this unique area of funeral service, and we're going to uncover what's involved in honoring those who served. But before we do that, and before we jump in, if you're enjoying Digging Deep, please don't forget to follow, like, comment, and share. Your support helps us keep these conversations going. So joining us today is Allan Cole. Welcome, Allan.
Thank you.
Allan is the owner and president of MacKinnon and Bowes, which is a very unique organization serving the funeral profession. We're going to talk a little bit about that. So Allan started his career in funeral service as a baby, as we just talked about a minute ago, sure. Much like me, starting off very young at your grandfather's funeral home in Brantford, and decided to get into the funeral business from there. So inspired by your grandfather, got into funeral service in 1975 and became licensed in 1978.
Correct.
Got those right? Good. The intro could be much longer than it is here, but we'll just highlight some of the key points. He is a past president of the Funeral Service Association of Canada, a past chair of the Funeral Service Foundation. Allan has held several national leadership roles and was Canada's first civilian mortuary affairs contractor. He's lectured across Canada on infectious disease protocols and holds U.S. Air Force certification in mass fatality operations. His honors include degrees from Humber College and the Canadian Forces Staff College, as well as multiple commendations for his service to the profession, and maybe your most illustrious role in being my funeral service uncle, as opposed to one of my funeral service dads. We were talking earlier about how I have all of these dads in funeral service, including my own dad, and you were always a little bit younger, so you were like the young uncle.
Thank you.
There you go.
It's quite an honor. But some of the dads that you're referring to were my mentors early on, and I was a little bit younger, and always very gratified that some of these folks that I really considered the heavyweights in our profession would take me on as a friend, and without their knowledge, provide mentorship and role models from which you could fashion your own career and make some of your own decisions to enhance your circumstance. I always was anxious to enhance where I was going, and knowing some of these people enabled that to happen.
Yeah. We are where we are because of standing on the shoulders of giants, and you and I talk about that a lot, right? Just such a rich history, for sure.
For sure.
So I want to talk a little bit about your journey in funeral service, and I think it's important for our listeners to know a little bit about MacKinnon and Bowes and what makes it different from a regular funeral home.
Yeah, well, I would always say that the difference is in the people. And the people that started this organization, Bob MacKinnon, Bill Bowes, Brian Kelly, were visionaries that, frankly, didn't necessarily interpret their vision accurately, because I don't think any one of the three would have ever imagined that it would result in what MacKinnon and Bowes is
what
today.
What it turned into, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Their dreams were perhaps less remarkable. They just wanted to provide good service.
And they saw that there was a need for staffing services and bombing services.
Yeah. The biggest need that they saw, which holds true today, in my opinion, was the need for licensed professionals to provide that service.
Yeah.
So anybody could go and pick up a body at a hospital or a home or whatever, and that's what was going on pre-1966 when they arrived on the scene. there was several services that were not licensed, they were not managed by licensed people, and all of the three, Bose, Kelly, and MacKinnon, all were licensed. And when they arrived, they brought their professionalism that they had achieved by becoming licensed, their experiences that they had gained during their internship, and they put that into practice, which provides an elevated level of professionalism that we all in this profession know and understand today, and appreciate that when we're dealing with other licensed service professionals. There's a language, there's a communications,
Culture.
there's a culture
Yeah.
that
An
that
expectation
there
that's
really
kind of
is,
understood.
without a doubt.
I think it's important to talk about how MacKinnon and Bose is a licensed funeral home,
Yes, we are.
but does not hold services to the public. Is
That's
that correct?
Yeah.
Right.
So in Ontario legislation, and you have to remember that we not only serve the Ontario community, but we serve every province in Canada, as well as many states in the United States. And in fact, our reach is worldwide in terms of many of the clientele that we serve the needs of. But for the Ontario purposes, we are a Class 1 licensed funeral establishment. So subject to inspection and evaluation by the Bereavement Authority of Ontario, we have to adhere to the Ontario legislation and maintain standards of service that are in keeping with standard requirements here in Ontario.
And there's so many things that MacKinnon and Bose does. Everything from answering phones to transfers to doing work for the coroner,
Yeah.
to providing staff, to providing vehicles.
Yeah.
But what we want to talk about today, and this is what I mean, we could probably talk about, you and I could talk about funeral service forever.
Sure.
But I think what we want to really focus on is the work that you do with military repatriation. So let's talk a little bit about how did that start? Where did that come from?
Well, you have to go back literally to World Wars One, Two, and the Korean conflict. The Canadian military at one time had their own mortuary affairs capability during World Wars One.
Like they had
and Two.
staff that they would.
Yeah, there was a designation where you could be a mortuary related person, and early
So
on,
a military person could be a mortuary person.
right, in World War One, oftentimes it was musicians and those that were in the band would put down their instruments, and then when they were on the
Go do
battlefield,
it.
grab a stretcher and away you go. And
Who are the best people to be able to help care for the dead? Let's think for a
musicians.
moment. Let's get the musicians.
The guy that plays the fiddle, he can do that. But, and I don't mean to belittle that at all. It's part of our historic fabric. But we were a part during World War One and Two of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, and so the Commonwealth War Graves Commission in World War One and Two created and maintained the cemeteries in which our fallen in the world wars were buried. And to this day, we still, as Canadians, contribute to the Commonwealth War Grave Commission to maintain those cemeteries that many have visited in Europe and faraway countries. But as we got into peacekeeping roles, primarily in the 60s and beyond, it was seen to be that those professions weren't needed because we're peacekeepers.
Right.
Most of the Canadians that are deployed were wearing blue United Nations hats.
Right.
And they were
Right.
peacekeepers.
So there weren't as many soldiers dying, and so
there's
therefore,
not a need for this.
Right.
So anyways, during some of the leaner years in the military, and the military would be the first to tell you about this, that there was cutbacks. And in so many areas, the government of the day said, let's cut back that military. In fact, the Canadian Navy at the end of World War II was the third largest Navy in the world. Most people wouldn't know that.
No, I wouldn't have known that.
No, people don't know that.
Yeah.
But in fact, of course, you do know, of course, that in World War II, on D-Day, the Canadians managed one beach out of 5. So when they say the invasion of the beaches at Normandy, one of them, Juno Beach, was exclusively managed by Canadians.
Wow.
So huge military back in those days. So that diminished and diminished and diminished, regrettably. And less money was put forward for the military, so they disbanded those things that they saw as superfluous. So the mortuary capability, they got rid of it. And yet we still deployed many members of our Canadian military to serve in peacekeeping roles. So without the benefit of that circumstance, when someone would tragically die, there was very minimal resources that they could bring to bear to look after the management of that deceased person.
But it also wouldn't happen very much up until.
Well, define much. I mean, there were several instances.
Okay.
In the 70s, there was a major incident in which I think 9 Canadian airmen died on a Buffalo aircraft that was brought down by a ground air missile over Syria. And they just relied on resources available at the time
Right.
to
So they just
gather
made
up,
do.
just make do,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
make do.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until the Canadian peacekeepers were dispatched to the former Yugoslavia, and that was a significant, there were over 3,000 soldiers at a time
Yeah.
on the ground. I should qualify soldiers, sailors, airmen, or airwomen
Right.
were on the ground in primarily Bosnia to oversee the peace. Now, they would tell you, any that were deployed there was anything but peace. And tragically, there were several incidents in which Canadians lost their lives. Now, they weren't combat roles, so
Okay.
they didn't, regrettably again, they didn't rise to the level that they were, on the front page of the national newspapers.
Right. Right.
These would be somebody that died in a vehicle accident, that were
Right.
well deployed to Bosnia. Someone died of an ailment that wasn't foreseen
Right.
when they were deployed. So they were incidents in which a death occurred, and the Canadian forces were ill prepared to look after how do we take that remains and prepare it and bring it back to their loved ones in Canada, because anyone that died well in the service of their country deserves that sort of treatment. So they canvassed around to several funeral providers, primarily in Ontario,
Right.
and asked, if we had a need overseas, what would you recommend, and could you help us? Well, they asked 4 people, and 4 of them said, you should call MacKinnon and Bowles in Toronto. This is the kind of thing they specialize
That's
in.
what you do, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Now, this was at about 1995.
Okay.
Call MacKinnon and Bowles. That's what they do. They'll probably help you. So we got a phone call from a major in a medical unit in Kingston, Ontario, that said, I'm calling from the Canadian Forces, and here's our problem, and what would you recommend? And so we started providing advice, and just off the cuff sort of information that would hopefully serve their needs a little bit.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, what we recommended, they utilized, which surprised the heck out of me, because oftentimes you'll hear from government and they'll
Yeah. You figure, okay, I'm going to tell them this, and then
they'll
whatever,
just
they'll
ignore
brush
it.
you
They'll
off.
just
Yeah.
ignore it.
Yeah.
They actually did what we said. They said,
Amazing.
this is thanks for the help with this. So that pacified them for a little bit, and then they called back and they said, some of that great advice you provided, we appreciate it. We think it was very good.
So you weren't even doing service for them. You were just like, hey, here's what I would do if I was here.
Correct.
Just telling them how to do it. Yeah.
And oddly enough, I kept some of the communications. And many would tell
I've
me,
seen your office. I'm
I'm
not
a pack
surprised.
rat. And I've got the original correspondence that, what should we do? And
Yeah.
so we would tell them, and then that would appear in some sort of an order and away they'd go. But then they called back and they said, we're not in that business. We don't do that anymore. So would you help us? If we called you on the spur of the moment, could you supply personnel to serve our needs, to jump on an airplane, go to where the incident occurred, and help us with our requirements?
So let's talk about that particular piece, right? Because this is in the conversations you and I have had about this, which I was completely unaware of and also found quite fascinating. So when there's a need, so when we were engaged in Afghanistan,
Yeah,
you would get a call
yeah.
and you would get on a plane, take it from there, because that
Well,
is
before we
amazing.
even got to Afghanistan, and I'm very proud of this because, as my colleagues are in funeral service, that if somebody calls upon you for assistance and you address their needs in a way
You
that
answer the call.
you answer the
right?
call.
You answer the call.
So first off, they said, we're going to war in Afghanistan. We are sending in
So they're calling you before.
Can you go over to Afghanistan and figure out what we need in the way of resources
Before going to war.
before we went to war?
Oh my goodness.
So I went over with a group. There were 21 Canadians. There wasn't any other Canadians in Afghanistan at that point. We were hosted by a United Nations group. It was a German deployment. So we went to a base camp called Camp Warehouse, and I was to go and see what other nationalities were doing with their casualties and recommend how we would construct a Canadian resource to deal with fatalities. Not quantified. I mean, they didn't tell me that there'll be this many, or
Right. Well, how
there
would
was
they know? Yeah.
no one knew at that point.
Yeah.
And to say that Canadians were going in a combat role was so unique because we've been peacekeepers for so long. But no, anybody should have imagined at that point there will be casualties.
Yeah.
But that wasn't anticipated. So I went over by myself. And the odd thing was, I mean, of course, we went over there and were being protected by the Germans. None of the Canadians had any guns. And we're in Kabul, Afghanistan. And I'm in a group of 21 of us. And the Germans provided a bus with a big red cross emblazoned on the side of the bus. Now, we had flak jackets and helmets and whatever else for personal protection.
You're like, I'm not in Toronto anymore.
No.
Yeah.
Well, when the plane landed in Afghanistan, the plane we arrived on traveled from United Arab Emirates to Kabul, Afghanistan, over northern Pakistan, was some of the most dangerous real estate in the world at that time.
Right.
And they nicknamed this airplane the Vomit Comet because over northern Pakistan, they'd get going like this and floating it back and forth, so if a ground-air missile got launched, they would be able to see it before it hit the aircraft. What that would matter, I don't know why that would matter.
At least you see it coming.
At least you know you're about to lose your life.
Okay, so I want to flash forward for a minute. So you get everything, you go there, you get things set up, and you're sort of like, oh, this is a new experience for me.
Yeah.
Then you get your first call.
Yeah.
Walk us through that, right? And talk us through like what you're thinking as you're going over it. So now we're actively engaged in war, right?
Yeah. Well, I think I would digress just for a moment. I know you're wanting to keep me on pace here, but I want to digress for just a moment because I used Funeral Service 101 when I went over there to say, okay, what are they going to need? Well, any good funeral director would look at it and say, all right, what are they going to need? Well, they'll probably need a body bag. Okay, I'll recommend that. But we know that refrigeration is a key element in what we do. Whenever we go to the hospital to pick up the body, you go to the morgue, which is generally a refrigeration unit. So I said we need one of those, and we need some gurneys, some stretchers. All of this Funeral Service 101, we all know that. And a novice, as we referred to them earlier, that isn't licensed, probably wouldn't have that degree of grasp of the situation. So once I said we need all these things, by the time they deployed large numbers of Canadians to this area, this was in-house and ready to be used. And then regrettably, it was needed, and it was needed with a frequency that frankly shocked Canadians.
Yeah.
It was
it changed everything in terms of how we think about military.
It started, and it ended those dark days of the military in which people in Canada didn't even know where they were deployed to, and didn't know the needs that they were filling at that point. So when they got to this combat role and they began to come home and they had died, the outpouring of Canadian emotion was unprecedented. Back in the eras of World War I, II, and the Korean War, when someone died, they buried them where they fell.
Yeah.
Now they're coming home.
Yeah.
And they're coming home in a casket,
and it's
draped in a Canadian flag.
And you can go and watch them come in, and it's on the
news. You watch it on live TV. Yeah. It's on the evening news. It's on the front page of the newspaper. And these pictures are of, 3, 4, 5, and 6 caskets lined up side by each.
Yeah. Changed everything. I want to talk a little bit about that first experience for you when you actually get the call. So you've gone to Afghanistan, you've gotten things set up, you've sort of, I love the fact that you use as your compass or your guiding light for that, you're using, those pillars of funeral service that we know to be true.
Absolutely.
So you're like, okay, you come home. That was an interesting experience. And then you get the call. Do you remember where you were when you got that first call?
Yeah, because of course with time zone difference, a lot of these calls came in the middle of the night, and
they're calling you, right? So you're handling this.
I don't want to get in trouble for saying this, but it's the reality. Back in those days, there was an initial bell ringer that came out from the Canadian Forces to the most senior elements of the Canadian Forces, and we were on the bell ringer. So when they became aware that
Because of course, this is like we're engaged in combat. This is all, what's the word? Classified in terms of
hugely
yeah,
classified,
yeah.
and this bell ringer would
So
go
it has
out.
to go up to you.
Well, not
In terms of the senior level in your organization, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
the reason it goes to you is because you're the senior level in the
Right,
organization. It's
right.
not something that you would be able to delegate out or anything like that.
No.
That's an
no.
interesting perspective. So
So
you,
the bell ringer would go out, and
what do you mean by bell ringer? What
well,
is that?
that was a military term, and so often the military had these acronyms and words that they would use that they would understand. The bell ringer would tell you, hey, there's been a major event.
So the bell ringer is a guy.
Oh, somebody
Or
sends
whoever,
out this thing,
who
probably
says-
from National Defense
Right,
Headquarters.
right, right.
He
Who says this has happened?
something has happened in Afghanistan, a vehicle's exploded or something, and it's likely that there are going to be fatalities associated with this scenario. And subsequently, you would begin to ready yourself, and so many of these notifications were, heart-wrenching in their dynamics when you would hear that, 3 people just lost their life in Afghanistan in a vehicle that had exploded. You'd have to get yourself wrapped around the fact that this, at the same time that you're hearing about this, they're readying a notification party that's going to go to someone's house.
Right, right. Because for being in funeral service, you know the human cost of all of that, right? It's not
sure.
just a fact that's happened.
No, this
Yeah.
isn't just a logistical requirement.
You're imagining the family's reaction. You're
Yeah,
imagining
it's the way, in funeral service, I mean, it's the same thing. You get a coroner's call of some vehicle accident somewhere, and if there's a fatality and you're being called, that someone else is
Yeah.
similarly becoming aware that their life is just,
It's funny how you think like that in funeral service. Like if I'm stuck in traffic on the QEW, I don't get ticked off
yeah,
because I'm just thinking about what does it mean for the
for sure.
and the
for sure.
fallout from all that. Anyway, we could talk about that.
So-
So you get the call.
Yeah.
It's the middle of the night.
Usually, yeah, it
Yeah.
was. I think because of the time differences that you would get a call at 2 in the morning and someone would say this has happened. And so then, you'd begin to rally up a team. You'd always send
How many of you would go?
2, always
Okay.
2. Now, for a larger event, you might send more than 2, but by and large, it would be 2 people.
So it's you and someone.
No, I wouldn't go
Oh, you didn't go.
generally. I went, Luke Gingras was the one that went first.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I remember
Luke
that.
was the one, and Luke traveled all over the world early on, from the early 90s onward, and has been to, I think, every continent, and participated in everything from the brief war between Israel and Lebanon.
But you did go.
Yeah, I did
So
for
talk
sure.
about that. What's that
Well,
like? You get on the plane.
Yeah, first off, you flew to the United Arab Emirates because there was a base there.
And you're just flying in a normal plane?
Well, usually you could
Okay.
fly in a military transport if they had one. If they could organize it, coordinate it, that you could go with the military transport, you could. But oftentimes, what would be used to bring the fallen soldier home would be a sustainment flight that was already somewhere else already anyways. So you couldn't get on it. So you'd
Right.
fly there. And then because we had this logistics base in the UAE, you would fly in generally on a Herc, so a twin-engine large cargo aircraft. You would fly into Afghanistan using one of those, and then the body would be brought back to this midway point.
I
And
want
then-
to talk about the flight.
the flight, yeah.
I want to talk about the flight because you're skipping over a piece
yeah. Well-
that to me, when you first told me about this,
Yeah.
it really affected me in a way that, because I mean, I know you.
Well, it affected me too.
Yeah, I know you, and I know you, you've known me since I was little.
Yes.
Imagining you in this scenario, it was surprising for me. Not that I didn't think you'd be able to do anything like that, but
No.
it was just like, oh my gosh, he's doing that. I
Yeah.
had no idea that he
Yeah.
was doing that. So
Yeah.
tell us about that.
So, there'd be a load planner that would help you with your kit and get you on board the aircraft and that sort of thing.
This
And
is
they-
the aircraft, like the Herc?
the flight that's gonna go into Afghanistan, and they were very
So you're
guarded
flying
about.
into a war zone.
Yeah.
Mentally, how are you feeling about that?
It didn't occur to you because.
You weren't even
I-
thinking about
I
it? You
have
just got a
I
job
have-
to do.
I have a civilian mentality, and war fighters like our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and airwomen are exclusively educated and cultured to understand the dynamics of that. The average civilian just doesn't get
So
it.
you're just clueless. You're just
Clu-
getting on this.
Clueless is
You're
probably
just
the
like,
best way to put it. And if
I can
I'm
kind of picture that actually.
yeah, and if I'm with a bunch of trained war.
You're feeling pretty safe.
Yeah, these folks, they know
Okay,
what
so
they're
you're
doing.
so you're getting on.
So
You're
they,
clueless.
first off,
Yeah.
you get your flak jacket. So I'm trying to put it on. It didn't
didn't
fit
think it
well,
was.
and the guy said, no. You don't put it on. You sit on it because if there's ground fire coming up at you, it's very not necessary to have that thing around your torso. You're better off to have it on your where you're
So
sitting.
you're sitting on a flak
You're
jacket.
sitting on a flak jacket. They give
Which
me
is essentially a flak jacket is like a bulletproof
bulletproof
vest.
vest, yeah, and
To
very
protect
heavy.
your underside.
Yeah, very heavy, and a helmet that didn't fit me well at all.
And
I
okay,
looked-
at this point, are you
I look-
starting to?
Well, it's comical, frankly. It's kind of silly, and you look more like Beetle Bailey than somebody that's going into a war zone with these people.
But seriously, what's going through your mind at this time?
Nothing.
Still
nothing.
clueless.
I'm going in. We're going to land at an air base that is all managed by the United Nations
Yeah.
and the folks that have signed on to be part of the coalition to bring about order in Afghanistan. So I'm feeling pretty safe. I think this is and once you're sitting on flak jacket, it still doesn't occur to you, hey, this could be dangerous. It didn't occur to me. We're just going. So we're going, and there's various cases on the floor on the aircraft. Pay no attention to any of that. There's boxes. They're probably have things in it that you don't want to know about.
Okay.
And midway over northern Pakistan, they take one of the junior kids that's sitting in a seat, and he
Kid being a
goes-
soldier.
I think he was either private or corporal.
Okay.
And they take him to the back window of the aircraft, and he puts his face up against the window, and they literally strap him to the window. And you've got a puzzled look on your face.
I do.
That was what my
You're like, what is this
what's
going
this kid doing? And he wasn't a kid. He was
Right.
But I thought he was
Yeah.
young.
We are of a certain age.
And he said he's looking for ground air missiles. So if a ground air missile gets launched beneath us, he'll probably see the flash point when it gets launched, and he'll be able to warn us that there's something on its way up towards us.
Okay, at that point, are you less clueless?
I think you start to get the grip on, boy,
Yeah.
this is something.
And it's not like you can turn around.
What's going through my head is that I've gone through extensive training. This is 1995. I graduated Humber in 78. I'm thinking, no one ever told me
No
about,
one
I never learned anything about any of
When
this
I was
stuff.
crawling around on the floor of my grandfather's funeral,
I
no
never
one-
learned it, nor did I ever think that my parents thought I would wind up here. My dad
Yeah.
was a proud veteran of the Canadian Navy, and if he thought that I was on board a Canadian military aircraft on my way to bring home one of our fallen, he would be enormously proud.
Wow. Wow.
He died long before any of this came.
Yeah.
Both my parents did, so they didn't know. But so, anyways, we land at Kabul airfield. That's where we were initially going to set up our camp, which is where we did initially set up our camp. Before we were deployed to Kandahar, we were in Kabul for longer than we were. No, I think probably longer in Kandahar than Kabul. But so that's where we set up. And when we're about to land, they open some of these cases, and they've got automatic weapons in the cases, and they're handing them out to people that are going to jump off the aircraft once we hit the ground and look for ground or any sort of sniper fire that's coming our way. This is when it's starting to resonate, and I'm thinking, this isn't your average flight.
Yeah.
There's something different about this than I'm used to
Yeah, you
on
think.
Canadian Air Canada or CPR.
Right, right.
And so anyways, when the plane lands and it's taxiing, the ramp goes down at the back. When it's slowed down enough, a couple of soldiers go running off the back with their weapons, and now they're looking for anybody around us that looks like they could be the source of fire. And the plane taxis to where it's going, and then it stops, and we get off, and at that point I think it's probably occurring to me that this is different.
Yeah. Different. That's a good
Originally, we then went to a fairly secure base that still was taking in ground fire. They were launching mortars into the base, into the area in which we were sleeping.
Oh my goodness.
but we were okay. And the Germans that hosted us at that particular time provided a vehicle for us to ride in, and it was a bus that had Red Cross pasted on the side, which we thought would be adequate to protect us for what we were needing. I think 2 weeks after we left, that same bus was firebombed
Wow.
by vehicles that drove up beside it, and suicide bombers exploded. I think 11 Germans lost their lives on that same bus. So this sort of messaging starts to resonate with you, and you think,
Yeah.
boy, this is
This is,
kind of dangerous stuff.
yeah, for sure. Wow. So.
But then, so you asked about, what happens, and when that call comes in and you dispatch, again, licensed funeral directors that have the same education that you and I do, and are firmly committed to doing what's necessary to provide mortuary services, care, respect, professional resources. They land on the ground, and that's their intent. Particularly my colleague, Luke Gingras, who's been with us for, God, I think Luke's been there for over 35 years now.
So when you land and it's starting to sink in,
Yeah.
but then I imagine at some point, then the work begins and you just settle comfortably into that work that has to
You
get
do.
done, right? So
Yeah,
it's
you
like,
do.
this is the job that I have to do, and this is, so you're bringing, so obviously it's the same journey back out, right?
Yeah.
I want to talk, just before we close, about the Highway of Heroes and how that came to be, and the sort of grassroots movement around that, and I'd love for you to tell our listeners about the story of, when you were first coming in with, I think you had said you had 4 fallen soldiers that you were bringing into Toronto. So
Yeah.
let's talk a little bit
The
about that.
first combat-related scenario that was of significant magnitude for Canadians to witness the tragedy associated with it was the incident at Tarnack Farms, in which 4 Canadian soldiers from the Princess Patricia Canadian Light Infantry lost their lives when they were doing a exercise in Afghanistan, and an American member of the Illinois Air National Guard mistakenly identified our troops and the ground fire associated with it with enemy fire. So he reverted back and dropped a large ordnance on our location, and
I remember that.
many were injured terribly, and still to this day suffer with enormous injuries, and 4 members of the PPCLI lost their lives that day at Tarnack Farms. And, because it was a unique incident in which it was friendly fire, and the Americans had caused this unfortunate incident that cost Canadians 4 lives, the Americans had volunteered early to provide resources to assist with this. Well, when that became apparent, and the colonel that I was dealing with suggested that they could use the American resources, I said, sir, I don't think the Canadian public would appreciate
Yeah.
that we revert to American resources when we know full well that it was an unfortunate incident caused by the Americans that cost these soldiers their lives. So I said, we have the expertise, the ability, the technology.
Yeah.
We can do this for you. And in the end, it will be a Canadian resource that provides what's necessary for this tragic incident. So he took that up to the higher ups, and it wasn't approved early on, but he came back and he said, well, if you guys think you can do this, then yeah, we authorize you to go ahead.
Okay.
And at that point, another side story was because of the experience that we have as licensed professionals, I knew the importance of after-action evaluation in these sorts of circumstances. If somebody dies in a tragic accident somewhere in Canada, there's tremendous resources brought to bear in the way of record keeping, of coroners, pathologists, DNA experts. The list goes on and on and on.
Yeah.
And I said, we need that resource. And they said, well, we don't have that. We've closed National Defence Medical Center in Ottawa, so we don't do autopsies anymore. We don't have anybody with those skill sets. And I said, well, as luck would have it, I'm a licensed funeral director that has experience with this day in and day out,
Yeah.
every day. I'm dealing with the coroner, the pathologist, the whatever. And they said, well, okay, if you know how to do that, you go ahead and get that organized for us.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happened.
Wow.
And I'm very proud of the fact that, the expertise that I had garnered as a licensed funeral director led me to understand what would be necessary and what you do.
Yeah. And you were able, what I think, just as a bit of to go down a bit of a tangent for a quick second, and I think you and I have talked about this before, is that you were able to figure out how to take those foundational elements that are the sort of the key culture aspects of our profession, right? The
Yeah.
tenets of service before self
Yeah.
and all of the other pieces that you've eloquently talked about today. And you were able to connect those with the very rigid ceremony and ritual that is the very unique culture of military services,
Yeah.
right? You
Yeah.
were able to bring those human pieces together.
Yeah.
And then there's a couple of stories that I want you to tell around that. So the first one is when you're coming into Toronto, you have the four
Right.
hearses, you're coming into Toronto, traffic's getting busy.
Yeah. Yeah, well, back at that initial time, and that's specifically the Tarnack Farm tragedy. And that was very early on in our response mechanism, so there hadn't been a great deal of coordination of, once we left the tarmac at Trenton, what would happen. And I remember it was televised live on CBC, was the return of these soldiers to Trenton Air Force Base. And we had gone through, some rigorous practices and made sure that everything was working and everybody knew where they were going to stand. And it was a tremendous circumstance of cooperation between the military and the civilians because, in the end, we kind of analyzed it to say that they'd look after all the saluting and marching and the ceremony required with that. We'll look after everything else and make sure the resources they need will be in the place they need it.
And they allowed you to bring that human element in, which is
They
amazing,
not
right?
only allowed, they were delighted to have somebody that would help them understand what was likely going to unfold, the resources they would need to
'Cause
make
there's-
it look good.
There's that disconnect in some ways between military and family, right?
Hugely.
And to be able to, I think it speaks well of the military that they were able to see that that's something that needed to have happen, right? And that
Yeah.
you allowed that to happen.
Yeah.
So you're coming back from the Trenton military base.
Yeah.
And it's being televised, is that right?
It was, yeah.
Okay.
And just before we leave, the vehicles leave the Trenton Air Force Base, the announcer on the CBC said, now the remains of the fallen begin their solemn journey to Toronto. Which I didn't hear, of course. I was driving the vehicle, and now I'm on my way to Toronto leading this procession, which was not led by police at that time.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, there was one military police officer that was sent that when he arrived, he told me he'd never been to Toronto before, so he wasn't sure where he would go. And I said, well, you go at the back of the procession, and if it looks like anybody's having vehicle trouble, you can respond to that.
Say,
and let
don't
me
worry,
know."
I got you.
Yeah.
It's all good.
So I said, we'll lead it
Yeah.
from the front with the funeral vehicles. And there was no family there at that point. It was escorts. There were 5 escorts, 5 senior NCOs, or 5 NCOs anyways, and a military officer, a captain. To this day, I remember him vividly. It was a Captain Gallo that was put in charge of looking after the escorts. And so we began our journey down the 401. And by the time
CBC's announcing this,
yeah.
right? And
And
so
as
people
we're-
are hearing about it.
So if you're in Port Hope, Cobourg, Bowmanville, Oshawa, Ajax, you hear this and you think, well, I can go out to the bridges and I can watch them go under the bridges. So this outpouring of Canadians arrived at the bridges, some with little flags, and it was sparse at that point.
Yeah,
There wasn't
yeah.
that many.
But you're starting to sort of see this.
As we're going down the
and it's
highway, I'm saying to
growing.
Luke Gingras and I on the front vehicle, and I said, look at these people on the bridges, and then it became apparent that they were aware that we were coming down there, so
Yeah.
they did that. So we and it was a Saturday afternoon. We were heading into Toronto, and my colleague at that point, Luke Gingras, sitting in the vehicle beside me, and the traffic's beginning to become
And
congested.
you know that like the cameras are on you.
Well,
Yeah.
man, oh man. And if anybody's been to Toronto on a weekend,
Yeah.
then you know that this is going to get worse. So my colleague Luke Gingras gets on the phone and phones the police detachment that we register the deaths at, 51 Division downtown on Regent Street. And he says, it's Luke Gingras calling from MacKinnon. Goes, oh, yeah. We're coming into town, and we are bringing these 4 fallen soldiers that have died in Afghanistan. Traffic's getting heavy. Any chance you'd have any officers available to help us come into the city? Mm-hmm. He says, I don't know, put a call out. I'll see what I can do. No promises. You should have told us earlier. Hangs up the phone. So we're motoring along very slowly. By the time we got to the Don Valley Parkway, there were 16 police cruisers.
16.
16.
I love that story so much because it talks about 2 things that I think are really unique about us.
Yeah.
It talks about how in funeral service, you see something happening in the moment you fix it,
Yeah.
right? You just think, okay, who can I
Gotta
call to fix it? And you get it done. There's no one who can do that like we can do, right?
Yeah.
And then the fact that there's this outpouring of grassroots support of people, humans, just having that human response to tragedy, which is amazing.
Yeah.
And then that extends to the police who say, you know what? Yeah, you should have called us, before, but we're gonna make sure that we take care of you now because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
So
you learn a lot of lessons with that, and it immediately enforces this collegiality, this brethren that exists with uniformed personnel.
Yeah.
So if they're a fireman or a policeman,
funeral directors transcend whatever difficulties there might be. There's like this universal unity around tragedy, which sounds like a weird thing to say, but I think there's truth to that, right?
There is.
You know that they have seen the terrible things that we have seen. I want to close with you talking about the story that I think really, to me, speaks to the humanity or the moments of sincerity and tenderness that came from bringing that human element, that understanding of grief and that funeral service perspective to that highly ritualized military experience. And I think the story that really speaks well of that is twofold. One, the story of your staff making sure that everyone was kept warm when they needed to be kept warm, and the beautiful story of Mikel Jean sharing her scarf with the family.
Right,
so if we can end with those 2 stories, I think that to me, those are, especially the Mikel Jean story, that's a story that sort of gives me, just...
me too. It's same with me.
Like there's not really words.
Yeah. So I think what you're referring to was we became aware that many of these families were traveling into Toronto and Ontario at some really challenging times of year when it was very, very cold. And they're having to travel from Toronto to Trenton, stand out on an Air Force base with no protection, with winds howling, and temperature could be, minus 10, minus 15 degrees. It was frigid. And if there were multiple fatalities, you could be out on that tarmac for an hour and a half.
Yeah, because you're still experiencing those rituals, right? And those military...
They were very solemnly offloading the remains.
Everything is done carefully.
Individually. So you would have to wait for one remains to arrive and be placed into the hearse, and then the family have an opportunity to go out and visit their loved one as they were arriving back in Canada. So, many of these people arrived dressed very lightly. They weren't expecting cold weather. They might come in from Victoria, where it was in the winter not very cold at all, and arrive in Toronto, and now it's like minus 15. So we said, well, people will arrive, they don't even have any mitts or gloves, so go down to the dollar store and load up and buy as many packages of those stretchy gloves and mittens as you can. Get some toques, knitted toques, and scarves, many as you can. So we made these wicker baskets with all these items in them, and we would take them to the Air Force Base, and in the passenger area where the families would gather before they would go out onto the tarmac, we would just go around and offer them these. We ran out. I mean, there wasn't enough to go around. But and everybody appreciated it. And at one point, the Governor General was frequently at the arrival ceremony. In fact, I can't remember any cases in which the Governor General wasn't there. And in particular, Michael Jean was there for many of them, and she remarked on the touching
The
nature.
caretaking,
Yeah,
yeah.
that somebody would, and they were just dollar store gloves. It wasn't like we'd been done something miraculous. This was just a thoughtful go out and buy something that people
It's the
genuinely
caretaking for the
appreciated.
person, right? And it's the anticipation and being able to think about the caretaking of the person. What do they need?
What do
right?
they need?
Yeah.
Think about what they needed. I mean, we had the drive from Toronto to Trenton. There was candy. There was for children. There was toys. We loaded up the limousine with things that we thought better make sure that there's refreshments, that the children have something to occupy themselves with for a journey that could be 2 hours long. So we did that frequently, and in the end it became a bit of a signature thing that people would remark on and comment on the thoughtfulness of it. And then Madame Jean at one point arrived, and there was a next of kin of one of the fallen that was particularly upset. They were all, of course, very upset, but this person, I think, had difficulty bringing themselves to composure enough to go out on the tarmac and receive their loved one from the aircraft back into Canada. And so, brief mention of this was made to Madame Jean. She made a special effort to engage with this person. And she was wearing a beautiful silk scarf at the time. And I remember when she arrived, she was wearing it. And when she met with this person, she took her scarf off and presented it and put it around this person to show that her love and respect was enveloping the person in a way that was so meaningful that many people were brought to tears by such an extraordinary gesture. So it was those gestures that were so important and meant so much. But I also did want to say, because we talked a little bit about the uniformed personnel, but one thing that we said to our people, no matter who they were, if it was myself, Jane Titcombe, Luc Gingras, we always had to emphasize, okay, so you're going to be a part of this scenario, but it's not about you. It's about the people that are in the back of those limousines, the people that are being carried in the hearses. That's who the story is. It's not about us. So I've always been reluctant to do this sort of thing, to talk about this, because I don't want it to be about us. We had many inquiries, in particular from the Globe and Mail, when all this was going on, and they wanted to interview us. And I said, well, if you want an interview, I can arrange something with the public affairs people at the military, or, you could probably track down one of the family members or one of the military members that want to talk about it. But the story's not about us. And I think as funeral service providers, we are caretakers of the necessities surrounding bereavement. But the story should never be about us. It should be about those that we're serving and how that impacts those people. Mm-hmm. That's the real story, in my opinion.
Well, thank you for trusting us with the stories and for coming on and sharing these stories that I think are so important to be told. And thanks for being here.
Well, it's my pleasure. I was surprised when I received the call that you wanted to do this, and I think it's very worthwhile to do it and reinforce the importance of what funeral service does day in and day out, because everything that was learned by myself and others was put into practice in some of these unique scenarios. But we've all got it in us.
We do.
We all understand what the need is, and we've all looked into the face of a grieving spouse, child, parent, anybody.
Yeah.
And realized, I can try and do something to try and provide some element of comfort in what's going to be the most trying moments of your life.
Yeah. Whatever needs to get done. And for all of those who are listening, thank you for joining us on this episode of Digging Deep. I hope that we have all, I know I have, this has been such a meaningful podcast for me, and I hope all of you have enjoyed Allan's stories. And thank you, Allan, for sharing your remarkable journey and insights into this world of repatriation and military funerals that most of us will never get a glimpse into.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Thanks.
If you found today's discussion valuable, please be sure to follow, leave a comment, and share Digging Deep with your colleagues. Your support helps us to keep bringing these important conversations to the profession. And until next time, I'm Heather Kiteley. Keep on digging deep.